Again, my name is Takumi. I'm a Max Weber Fellow at the European University Institute. My core research interest lies at the intersection of global governance, civil society advocacy, and the environment. In today's presentation, I will provide a theoretical problem first, and I will use that to motivate my empirical analysis of wildlife conservation agendas. The theory that I'm interested in is organizational ecology, which has attracted a lot of attention in the field of international relations. What it does well is to understand and explain the diversity of organizations in a given political context. For example, in the global environment, there are intergovernmental organizations like UNFCCC, CBD, and CITES, but we also have private actors trying to set standards and advocating for particular issues and trying to monitor carbon emission and so forth. So there's a lot of organizations, different kinds of organizations out there, and want to understand what kind of organizations exist. So one important dimension that organizational ecologists have identified is the dimension of generalism and specialism. Generalist organizations like WWF work on a wide variety of issues, including a wide variety of animals, whales, elephants, etc. By contrast, specialist organizations depend on a narrow set of resources. For example, the Bat Conservation International is really trying to advocate for bats, and those people who support this organization is really have a particular interest in bat conservation. So what's interesting about this is that even though generalist organizations like WWF is large and have a scale economy, they cannot outcompete small specialist NGOs in every sort of in the global sense. There are always those people who are interested in particular issues, and they will support these specialist organizations. That explains well in terms of why certain organizations exist and others don't. But it doesn't really give us a tool to understand the consequences of these organizational choices on the environment, on the political environment. What really means to have specialist issue foci as an organization, have some kind of impact on what we think of as an issue. Unlike ecology of species, the resource providers are humans who think about what kind of conservation issues are important or not. So I draw on the literature on transnational advocacy, which talks about agenda setting, which doesn't engage with the organizational ecology per se, but it talks about how our understanding of important conservation issues might change. In general, this literature asserts that leading NGOs have disproportionate agenda setting power. So those are the ones that, Greenpeace, WWF, or in other issue areas that could be Amnesty International and so forth. So those ones are setting agenda, and the small NGOs are just bandwagoning, because by the nature of advocacy, the achievement you have at the international level, whether changes in the international norms or law, is public goods in nature. So small NGOs can free ride on that. But given the ecological framework of organizations, small NGOs cannot always be doing this in order to survive. They would be outcompeted by the simple scale economy. They would have to be specializing in certain aspects of environmental issues or conservation issues in particular. Now, going back to the feedback effect, so I'm trying to merge this insight from organizational ecology and also the insight of global transnational advocacy. What I'm interested in is that these specialist NGOs and the relationship with issue salience. Issue salience defined as the amount of public attention given to each specific conservation issues. Because specialist NGOs are appealing to those people who are passionate about the conservation in the first place, and these people are trying to, or frequently expressing their opinions and be mobilized and so forth, they are primarily contributing to the public agenda, while generalist NGOs like WWF have a variety of audiences like like Coca-Cola, which might not be interested in the conservation in a genuine sense of a word. So they may not be generating a lot of issue salience. So even though specialist NGO tend to be small, their effect might be non-trivial. So again, my statistical analysis will be looking at the association between issue salience and specialist NGOs, considering the existing literature's insight that generalist leading NGOs also account for issue salience. And there's some implications about global governance outcomes, in particular with the conservation outcomes. But that's sort of implications rather than the main content of my, my presentation here. So I use red list in order to specify the sort of set up the boundary conditions. The red list catalogs all biological species that are known to exist on Earth. And I look at mammalian species because they tend to get more conservation support. And among mammalian species, there are roughly 2,500 mammalian families facing human-caused threats like agriculture, urbanization, and so forth. But this is a biological or scientific catalog. So they divide, for example, whales into much more specific species. But advocacy work and public discussion, these are just simply used as whales are whales, not just, its subspecies. So by collapsing these families into 203 units, I get the sort of the unit and the total number of observations here. So 203 is basically the number of animals that I'm going to have in my quantitative analysis. I collected the data from 2008 to 2015 corresponding to the red list updates about the conservation status, which in other words is how close an animal is to extinction. I collected the data from US, UK, Japan, and Australia in order to have some variety in terms of institutional setting of advocacy organizations and also biodiversity. I picked up 2 newspapers for each country based on progressiveness, like New York Times, and then the other is based on the circulation like USA Today. And for NGO data, because I have to look at the specialization, which can only be observed from mission statements. So I use national charity registers in order to extract mission statements of all NGOs registered in these countries. So the main outcome variable is the, again, the amount of attention or the issue salience of each animal. And I use the animal name and conservation as a keywords to scrape or collect the newspaper articles. But even then, it will include a lot of newspapers that do not talk about wildlife conservation exactly. So I have to discount those articles. And what I use is something called the bag of words approach to capture the newspaper content. I generated keywords that captures content of wildlife conservation. So for each newspapers, the number of appearances of keywords is divided by the total number of words in the newspaper, and it's aggregated for each issue. So in other words, it is a it is a weighted sum of newspaper articles, weighted as in terms of the meaning or semantic relevance to wildlife conservation issues. I'm happy to talk more about how this dictionary is made, but that's how I basically discounted the irrelevant articles in the corpora. So here's sort of the results of the issue salience. It should follow our general intuition of what kind of issues are salient and others are not. Elephants and whales are sort of usual names, and then you have deers and bears. Those are more domestic animals that are discussed in relation to wildlife management. There's some weird ones that needs explanation. So for example, cat is not simply just about the domestic cat, but it is big cats that is sort of a umbrella term for tigers and lions, etc. And so this is a variation that I'm going to explain using this the advocacy work that I can observe in the global level. So the leading generalist NGOs again is the WWF, which is pretty consistent across across time in the literature. So I use the publication of by WWF, and simply I'm just counting the number of publications rather than applying the text analysis, because we know that WWF will be talking about wildlife conservation. So the tiger, elephant, rhino, those are usual names that they are advocating strongly, and they are slightly focused more towards the endangered animals, but it's not necessarily the case that the most endangered animals here are taken care of by WWF. Specialist NGOs are defined by their mission statements, specifically mentioning any of the 203 animals that I mentioned before. And it corresponds to some of the salient animals like elephants and rhinos and whales and so forth. But we also see domestic animals, or domestic animals in the sense that I collected the data from, like a bear and bat and a badger and a koala. These are not. It's in a sense it's international issues, but they are mostly advocated by these specialist NGOs. So when I ran a regression with a more traditional understanding of international advocacy, which is basically those large NGOs, leading NGOs have agenda setting power, it does explain the variation of issue salience. But when I include specialist NGOs in the model, the statistical significance disappears, and instead specialist NGOs have consistent explanatory power. In other words, it's better, the variation of issue salience is better explained by the variation of how specialist NGOs are concentrated on various different issues. I also included some of the sort of control variables. Global North variable indicates whether an animal lives in the country that I collected the data from, which are US, UK, Australia, and Japan. Endangeredness of an animal doesn't really affect how salient of an animal in the public sphere. And the culture, it captures sort of the popular presence of animals. So the animals are discussed in a wide variety of settings. And I used the Amazon's children's book section to capture some of the sort of cultural salience or presence of different animals. It is statistically positive, but it is just a control variable. So this is the largest limitation is that it's a data limitation. I cannot have a very long longitudinal data to capture the causal order. So in order to solve that problem, I use mini cases to illustrate what kind of things that specialist NGOs do based on the interview research. I don't have time to present the whole research here, but some of the specialist NGOs are trying to be issue entrepreneurs, bringing up new issues on the table, while others are issue keepers in the sense that they are trying to advocate for already salient issues like whales and elephants. And they are usually motivated by the frustration against organizations like WWF. Okay, so to summarize my findings and implications, so what I found is that the specialist NGOs can have far-reaching consequences on our understanding what important conservation issues are. And it is, from the theoretical point of view, it is a friendly amendment to the application of organizational ecology and thinking about what kind of impact organizational choices have, particularly with a specialist versus a generalism, have on the agenda of global conservation governance. And as an implication, I didn't talk about it so much about the policy implications, but whether higher issue salience will lead to resolution of any issue is questionable, because a lot of specialist NGOs are working on issues that are already salient. And through the interviews, these organizations talk about, they don't really foresee the future where these issues will go away, which might be the true, but it might not. So we have basically that attention towards issues are limited resources. So there's a difficulty of new conservation issues to arise, given that these specialist NGOs are advocating for the issues that they have to basically keep going for the duration of their organizational longevity. This will be it for my presentation. And if you have suggestions or comments, please let me know through email or when we open up the discussion. Thank you.